Welcome to another edition of the Backyard Professor podcast series, coming at you live from the lovely state of Idaho. I'm Kerry Schertz, the Backyard Professor. I've had a very interesting request by a very dear friend of mine, Paul Wallace. Hi, Paul. I better say hi to Paul right now. He listens to my podcasts, and he has made a wonderful request, and I am going to begin producing this series of podcasts about his request on the Council of Nicaea. What brought it about? We understand the councils, the synods, the various groups and meetings of the church are associated with the idea of the man-made creeds. But what about the historical details? What is it that happened in Christianity that caused these people to get together and formulate such contradictory, problematic creeds about God and man and salvation and so on and so forth? And I think Paul has a very good point. We haven't studied the creeds near to the extent that we ought to. So in the process of working up some materials, going through several of my various books, both from the early Christian church fathers as well as other secondary sources, I've discovered some remarkable things about the councils that I didn't even understand. So this is quite interesting, quite fun and enjoyable for me to do for you, my listeners. So I want to discuss what I'm going to do, my strategy on this, because of the nature of it. Now, there's been a lot written about Christian history, of course. My goodness, here in the West, thousands of books. I want to use a few secondary sources that basically have gone through all of the materials and given us a synopsis, as it were, a bird's eye view of the issues, the people involved, what happened before, during, and after the Council of Nicaea. Happened in the early 300s, probably about 319 to 325, and then, of course, because of the Council of Nicaea, many, many other councils were called throughout the next several centuries of various councils and synods trying to explain even further what do we mean in the Council of Nicaea. What is this creed all about? Because it never was very clear to anybody anyway. And this is the beginning of the doctrine of the Trinity and the beginning of the use of the creation ex nihilo doctrine that certainly was not understood by either the early Christians in Jesus' day nor to the Jews. This is made very clear by the scholarship. I want to use a few secondary sources. And so there's going to be some overlap, some repetition, and this is probably a good thing, because what these secondary sources do is each one of them have a little bit different emphasis. I want to use, who is this? Pagans and Christians, Robin Lane Fox. This is Alfred Knopf, 1989. He's got a couple of ideas on Constantine that I want to share with you. On the main overview of the Council of Nicaea, one of the very most important, easy to understand, and well articulated views is by Karen Armstrong in her book, A History of God. This was 1994. It's going to be chapter 4 I take extensively from, Trinity, the Christian God. Then there's another lesser-known book by James L. Barker. Now, James L. Barker is a direct descendant of the Waldensians, whom the Catholic Church persecuted extensively in the medieval ages. The Cathars and the Waldensians were persecuted people. He's a direct descendant of them. This is the Bookcraft book, Apostasy from the Divine Church. This was copyright 1960. The first Bookcraft printing is 1984. This is an extensive... Barker was a phenomenal study of early Christian history as well as the medieval ages. And his analysis of the Arian controversy is really superb. And then I want to utilize Hugh Nibley's materials, not so much the world and the prophets, which has been around, thank goodness for farms. They found the actual radio transcripts of this book, and so I also have it as his radio broadcasts, which are exquisitely delightful to listen to, but also his new book that Farms put out, Apostles and Bishops in Early Christianity. This is by Deseret Book, and this is the year 2005. I'm also going to utilize some materials from Barry Bickmore from his book on early Christian teachings as well. In his very fine book, Restoring the Ancient Church, Joseph Smith and Early Christianity. This was published by Fair in 1999. Bickmore says something real interesting. Actually, I'll start my podcast with a quote from Barry Bickmore on page 37. Discussing the relationship of the Emperor Constantine with the Roman Empire as well as with early Christianity and the ideas in the early 4th century asserting control over the affairs of the church. How can an emperor do this? Well, he could do this because the church was legalized by Constantine. It was because of Constantine that the Christians began to have less and less persecution, I'll put it that way. But the point that Barry Bickmore brings up is real interesting. Eusebius, actually the emperor's relationship with Eusebius, the great church historian, is interesting. Constantine called him to deliver the opening address at Nicaea, and 6 years later, declaring that he was fitting to become bishop of the whole world, he had desired to translate him from Caesarea to the much more important see of Antioch, an offer which Eusebius was humble enough to decline, actually. Bickmore asks, how could the emperor of Rome, who was not even a Christian, have the authority to appoint bishops? Apparently he assumed he had that authority, but there was no God-given revelation. Bickmore brings up one of the main issues of the point of the Council of Nicaea that I want to discuss using several other sources. So this is another really excellent source I wish to make use of. I want to begin my and then of course my primary sources. I have Socrates and Sozomen and Gregory of Nazianzen, Basel, Eusebius himself, St. Ambrose discussed it, Athanasius, of course, was one of the big ones in the Council of Nicaea, Hilary of Poitiers, a very important early Christian source, and Gregory of Nyssa, among others of the actual primary sources from their writings in the Nicene and the post-Nicene Fathers that I will get to as well. So I don't mean to hop, skip, and jump somewhat, and I don't mean to keep repeating the same information, although it is repeated with a different type of emphasis, and some facets of the Council of Nicaea was explored by these various authors, some weren't, and so there is some very, very excellent zipping together of different emphasis on different aspects of the Council of Nicaea that overall, I believe, give us a very, very good pictorial overview of the importance as well as the impression, as well as the use and misuse and abuse of Nicaea. Barker notes that for 3 centuries the church had been without a prophet leader who by revelation could answer questions which arose about the idea of what is revealed doctrine. But of course, I'm taking this out of chapter 22 of his book, which is entitled The Arian Controversy, page 238. This is his book, Apostasy from the Divine Church. Armstrong notes that it was about 320 when this fierce theological passion occurred, this argument between Arius and Athanasius. The interesting thing is, it began in Egypt, but it spread quickly to Syria, Asia Minor. Various different people were singing popular ditties that proclaimed that